Today, let's start the discussion with Brad Kelley. He's a consultant with Gershman, Brickner Bratton, GBB, which is a waste management in the US. So, Brad.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Kelley with GBB. My background is in the design and equipment and processing of recyclable materials. I used to work for a company that built the equipment, and I did a lot of the layouts and design, so I understand sort of how the equipment works, how things work in the real world from after you put the material in your cart and it goes off to the facility. That's kind of my expertise. Here at Gershman, Brickner Bratton, or GBB for short for everyone, I've done some research in sort of the rural recycling and how the low population densities can affect how people can recycle as well. So that's my background.
So with Professor Brajesh Dubey, he's from the Indian Institute of Technology. Professor?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, it depends on where you are in the world. So I'm Brajesh Dubey. I have my BTech in Civil Engineering from the same institute where I'm sitting right now, which is IIT Kharagpur. Then I did my PhD from University of Florida, Gainesville. So I'm a Gator for those of you who are in US football fans. And I've been teaching, doing research, consulting, and working with industry in the solid waste field for nearly 15 years now, mostly in North America, in US for quite some time, in Florida and in Tennessee. Then I was in Canada for more than 3 years. Last 3 years I was there. And in between, I happened to be in New Zealand for a little while and a few months in Nigeria for a UN project. Now, recently, I have come to India at my alma mater to teach solid waste, hazardous waste, life cycle, those type of courses. And I'm trying to get some research going on in waste management area in India.
Victoria. Victoria is a consultant with Ricardo-AEA. Victoria, take it.
Hello, yes. I'm a senior waste management consultant within our resource efficiency and waste management practice. I'm a chartered waste manager with the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. I've been working in the sector for about 9 years now and with Ricardo-AEA for just over a year. Prior to that, I've worked for a private waste collection and processing contractor who owned a MRF, and I used to do the tendering for MRF contracts, so for getting material into the facility. And then prior to that, I worked at another consultancy, and I've also worked for for local government, for a local authority, sort of working on their promotion of their waste collection services. So I've got quite a broad view of sort of collections from households.
Great. So starting with the first question, I've shared these questions online. And starting with the first question, maybe we can go with Professor Brajesh Dubey. Professor, you worked in Canada and the US for quite some time. So what are the trends there? What is the trend in Canada in particular when it comes to source segregation and commingled recycling?
So in Canada, especially in the southwestern Ontario, where I was most of my work was focused on, so in Guelph, city of Guelph, or in Toronto area, where we have a good chunk of population, things are going more into single stream recycling, and where rather than which helps in collection when your tonnage goes up, and then we have MRF, which is getting from semi-automated to more and more automation. Recently, there was a waste management company set up a MRF in Cambridge, near Cambridge, Ontario, which was with all those fancy technologies with the Titec and different density separators. So again, it's a single stream recycling, get the more tonnage. It does get you more contamination compared to multi-stream recycling, but then you deal with those contamination, other stuff with your sophisticated automated technology at your MRF. So that's what I saw the trend for the last few years.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, Victoria, did you have something to say?
Yes, I think from a UK perspective, I think what is sort of important to highlight is that we have a very heavily regulated industry here for waste management, which actually influences a lot of the decision-making processes around how waste should be collected. Looking at the UK as a whole, about 77% of authorities, and that's local government authorities, have some form of commingling. So that might be a fully single-stream commingled service, or it might be a two-stream service where the majority of materials are commingled, but some of the materials are separated. So glass is quite a common one to keep separate because of its impact on other material output products. So, for example, its impact on paper at the back end, or keeping paper separate. It accounts for a high proportion of the material and it has a high value. When you look at the sort of individual areas on their own, if you look at England in particular, we actually have no sort of direct government policy on how materials should be collected. However, most of it is related to the waste regulations, which transpose the EU Waste Framework Directive into law here in England, Wales and Scotland. And basically, that stipulates that you must separately collect materials wherever it is necessary to achieve high quality, and also wherever it is technically, economically, and environmentally practicable. So it's quite a complicated process that you have to go through as an individual authority to actually determine whether you need to implement source-separated collection systems or not. Because here, the default is that you should have separate systems. And then commingling is almost where that's not appropriate. In Scotland and Wales, the situation is slightly different because they've actually got, from their local government policies, a move towards, or a policy position to move towards source-separated collections, because the government there believe that those systems deliver higher quality recycling and therefore should realise a higher income from those materials. So in Scotland and Wales, we're seeing more of a trend towards separate collections, whereas in England there isn't that policy driver to move towards a source-separated collection system.
That's interesting. I have some questions on regulation, which we'll come back to later. And now let's go to the person who designs the fancy technology, like Professor Dubey said. Brad, so what are the trends in the US? Are cities going for commingled recycling or for source segregation, source-segregated collection?
Here in the United States, it depends. It kind of depends on your population density. The larger municipalities, the bigger cities, are certainly trending toward the single stream, larger bin collection to increase the tonnages, and it kind of in conjunction with that, the material recovery facilities, or MRFs, and the ones that process the recycling. They are getting larger as well. So the trend is to get away from the smaller sort of local picking plant where they pick the stuff out by hand, to larger automated machinery-intensive facilities that, by economies of scale, can process a large tonnage of this material. So the single stream works well in that sort of environment. In the more rural environments, it's still mostly source separated, either by drop-off facilities or by limited collections of source separated materials, and that seems to still be the kind of that dividing factor is what your population is.
Interesting. When it comes to the debate on these two methods, it generally boils down to what's easy for the public and the quality and quantity of recyclables. And like Victoria mentioned, regulation is another factor that has to be considered, at least in the UK. Regulation, since it's such a huge factor, does it increase on the business? How does that work?
In the UK, unfortunately, we can't simply take public opinion and ease of use of a particular service type into consideration when actually considering whether you should implement separate collections or not, because basically that doesn't form part of the part of the assessment of determining whether separate collections are necessary or technically, environmentally, or economically practicable. Because from a technical perspective, basically, if the system is being operated somewhere else within the UK, which most, there will be somewhere similar to your local authority that is operating a source separated system, basically, then it would be classed as technically practicable because someone else is already doing it. So generally, the main argument comes down to whether you can demonstrate from a cost perspective that a commingled service would offer better value for money than a source separated service. So it's quite difficult because you have to go through quite a lengthy process to evaluate what you think your likely quality would be, and then also to go on to what the economic impact would be of going to commingled or source separated, and then also the environmental impacts of doing those as well in order to be compliant with legislation. So it's not simple as, putting in a system that's easy that will generate the most tonnage.
That is interesting. So if there is someone building a decision-making tool for taking decisions in this case, so they should definitely consider regulations, at least when it comes to the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And Brad, how much does regulation play into decision-making in the US in this case? Brad, we can't hear you. Do you want to join again? No, we can't hear you. Okay. All right. So Brad will join us again in the panel, and so let's go with Professor Brajesh Dubey. So, in your experience in Canada, how much does regulation play in
terms of regulation, there is a diversion goal. So, say for example, Ontario province will have a diversion goal of certain percent, 40%, 50%, 60%, and the individual city will have their own diversion goal. So other than that, whether they go for single stream or multi-stream, it is left more on the city to decide what they think is more appropriate. As Brad was mentioning earlier, if it's a mostly rural area, they would probably go for multi-stream recycling even in Canada, because Canada and US has similar kind of geographical population dynamics as well, other than big cities in Toronto area that you have, which so big cities, they will go for single stream recycling. It's like a semi-urban area, they may still go for multi-stream recycling, and they're all driven towards having a certain diversion rate. Say the diversion goal is 50%, 70%, 80%, whatever. So that's kind of the driving force behind that. And it's left on the city side.
Okay. And how about this in India? You've seen the situation in India, and there's a huge Clean India campaign going on. And what kind of systems do you think will work better here? Because I think they're trying to use a source-separated system, and on the other side, many other cities are still trying to put systems in place. What do you think?
So in the Indian scenario, since our most of the cities have higher population densities as compared to typical North American or any European city, other than big cities in Europe or in US. So it's with the high population density, I would say we can go for single stream recycling, because you will be able to get more tonnage there. But then you have those in India, you have that informal recycling going on as well, where there's what is known as kabadiwalas will come to your houses and collect the recyclables from you. So most of the good papers and plastics are actually gone before it reaches the MRF or reaches the waste collection center. So you have to somehow get them involved into the loop and get them becoming part of the system, so that they recycle is still, and they become part of the waste collection, like a formal waste collection system, so that they do it properly. The problem is they do it, but they don't do it properly. There is a lot of environmental and human health implications of improper recycling of those waste materials here.
Interesting. And let's see if Brad's back. Brad, can you say something?
Am I back yet? Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. I don't know what happened. I think my computer froze on me.
All right. So, what's the role of regulation on decision making in the U.S.?
In the U.S., there's some role of regulation, especially in places like California or perhaps Massachusetts, where there's been a lot of push toward, you know, the recycling and the diversion and things like that. But it's not as strong as it is certainly like in the UK or Europe. Realistically, here the biggest trend is economics. You know, like I talked about earlier, the rural versus you know, urban type settings. Here in the U.S., the collection costs alone, just to go out and get the material, is about 2/3 of the entire cost for recycling. You know, the processing, the sales you get from the material, things like that. That's the other third. It's really expensive to go out and get the material. So trying to do that efficiently is one of the big drivers here. Also, the tonnages available and the increased cost of processing. Like I talked about, the economies of scale. It's very difficult for small or rural type cities or counties to be able to, you know, say, yeah, we can build a MRF, you know, to do all this single stream processing and to deal with the potential residue that will come with that, because it's just expensive to do that. The equipment's expensive, the buildings are expensive, the collection is expensive. So trying to, you know, and that's one of the things the legislatures have a difficulty here with, because everyone wants to put down a number of, we're going to recycle this much, but the economics of that are still very difficult for everybody, and that's one of the things that gets wrestled with a lot here in the U.S.
That's interesting. And all right. And Victoria, do you see any change in composition of waste over the years?
Recently, there's been some data out that actually shows that the overall residual waste, the overall arisings have increased by 3.7% since 2014. So we're actually seeing quite a marked increase in arisings. And it's quite interesting, particularly when you look at that relative to the improvement in recycling rate, which has only been 0.6%. So at the moment, we're not sure, you know, we haven't got the level of detail to assess where that's coming from. But we are seeing some interesting trends. For example, newsprint. We're seeing sort of an 8% decline year on year in the sort of newspaper circulation through the increase of you know, things being available online. But also because we've gone through a period of austerity, things like newspapers are the things people have cut back on, you know, when they haven't been, you know, when they're facing tighter budgets. Glass, we're sort of seeing an increase in lightweighting of products, so to improve, to reduce transport costs. We've seen companies moving away from using glass packaging to using plastic packaging to make the product lighter. So we're actually seeing an increase in plastic within the stream and a decrease in glass. Food waste in general, we've seen a bit of a decrease in the sort of the fraction of food waste that makes up the overall waste, and we think again that's probably linked to the economy and the fact that people's buying habits have changed, but also because we've been introducing separate collections of food waste. That's led to greater awareness of what people are buying and throwing away, and people are sort of changing their own habits. Another factor has also been changes in the way that materials are collected. So, you know, what materials are available to be collected either at drop-off points or at the curbside. So obviously, if you make a change at the range of materials collected at the curbside, it obviously has a knock-on effect on the rest of your recycling system, because here we have a lot of local drop-off points that supplement the curbside service, often collecting the same range of materials with perhaps a few enhancements. But then in addition to that, we also have a network of what we we call household waste recycling centres, which are actually, I suppose, recycling centres for much more materials beyond your dry mix recycling, and it's sort of looking at the impacts of changes on those different elements of the system and what changes that has on what you collect at the curbside or what you collect at the drop-off points. So, yeah, we are definitely seeing a change in composition through, yes, I suppose a lot through linked to the economy.
Interesting. And Brad, so there's been this huge awareness about food waste, increasing awareness about food waste. And is that really impacting any composition changes in the U.S.? Like Victoria mentioned, separate collection.
The food waste hasn't had a huge impact yet. There are some regulations in the northeastern states, in 4 states in particular, that are banning food waste from the landfills, but that hasn't become a nationwide trend yet. It's the food waste in the MSW, is generally separated from the dry recyclables. You tend not to get much food waste in that. A lot of the big factors have been paper, plastic, and glass. Those, that's your traditional single stream here in the U.S. And there's a lot less paper. Everyone's reading their tablets now, or their iPhones. They're not reading the newspapers or the magazines anymore. And there's a lot more, a lot larger variety of plastics materials that are out there, and consequently, no one, the glass hasn't necessarily gone up in volume, but it's become a larger part of the single stream composition because the paper's gone down. Paper weighs quite a bit as well, but plastic doesn't weigh as much. Glass weighs a lot. So you're getting 20, 22, 25% of your single stream tonnage is all glass now. So that's been an interesting trend, and this affects how the machinery itself works, because the design is done for, say, 50% newspaper and mixed paper, 20% plastics and 15% glass and maybe 10% cardboard. Well, now everyone's ordering stuff off of Amazon and some of the other places. They get everything that comes in this cardboard box, and they're not reading their newspapers anymore. So the cardboard is going up, the newspaper is going down, the plastics are going up, and the lightweighting means there's more plastic bottles per pound or per ton. So your system has to deal with this, in sort of a different way. And this has caused some problems, especially in some of the older MRFs, but even some of the newer MRFs that aren't well designed for sort of this versatility of things changing. It's a problem in the equipment side and the MRF side to try to anticipate what can change and how the system is going to deal with that.
That's extremely interesting. So there seems to be a general trend towards increasing plastics and cardboard and decreasing paper. And it's wonderful how you can work on a MRF or look at the composition of waste and then talk about the society as a whole, the mega trends in the society. And let's confirm if that's the case in Canada too. Professor Dubey?
Yeah, it's a pretty much similar trend as Brad said. In Canada, but in Canada they have, in many cities in Canada, they have separate food waste collection, especially in Ontario. The food waste is collected separately, either goes to a compost plant or an anaerobic digester. And as you might know, that Canada had the first anaerobic digester running in North America. So it's in Toronto, and they have built recently a big one in Toronto as well. And City of Guelph, City of London, Ontario, Hamilton, they all have compost plants. So food waste, there is a three-way collection in many cities in Canada where the food waste is similar to San Francisco, where they have separate food waste collection, and then you have your recyclables and the stuff that needs to go to a landfill or waste to energy plant. So in terms of the recyclables, what I was on the city panel for City of Guelph, and we were struggling to keep up with our recycling rate because of the lightweight of material. Although we were processing more recyclables, but our percent by weight tonnage was the same, or it will even come down sometimes. And in the report, it will not look good because it will feel to our politicians that we are actually doing a poor job, which we were not. So that's one thing is Studying the paper, of course, is the percentage-wise. Paper is going down. Glass seems to be more. Plastic is getting lighter. So that's similar trend that you see in UK or in US, because I think it's a similar economy and similar type of material goes everywhere in the world these days anyway. So.
It's really interesting. And Brad, you want to talk about the contamination levels in single stream? As a equipment designer, what's your take on that?
Well, it's certainly there. There can be a lot of reasons for that. Some are just, lack of education. Some of it is, people just want to go out there and grab all the recycling they can get, even if there is contamination there. And some of it, some of it's to be expected, and the equipment is supposed to be able to deal with it. The more sophisticated your equipment is, the more trained your people are that are there to deal with the contamination. It's not a huge deal, but it can become one. There's more and more outcry from some of the larger MRF operators here in the U.S. about the amount of, say, diapers that show up. And some of that can be attributed to even back to the producers of these, because, the diaper box has a big recyclable symbol on it. Well, that's for the box. But people will think, well, okay, I can recycle my diapers in because it said recycling on the box. There was some confusion, for lots of people there. So you get these things that show up. I know that Recommunity just had an article about 6 months ago talking about they have like 1.5% of their contamination, which doesn't seem like a huge number, was diapers. But if you stand at the MRF and you watch all these diapers go by, it seems like it's all that's there. It's something else. So it can be a combination of things. Education, obviously, is a huge part of it. Having the ability to reject a load. A lot of MRFs don't have that ability. That they say, look, wherever you're collecting, it isn't working. You're grabbing garbage. You're not grabbing recycling. Trying to work with your collectors and things like that can help as well. And also just having robust equipment that's going to be able to deal with, assuming that you're going to have 10% residual stuff in there. How are you going to handle that? It's kind of the responsibility of everybody, I guess.
Interesting. And you don't have any machines for diapers, I guess.
Say again, Rajiv?
But you don't have any machines to separate diapers.
No machines to recycle diapers yet.
And I think this was an observation made by some panelists on a different panel when it comes to menstrual pads in India, and how there are communities of informal waste pickers coming together to form organizations, and when they receive all this waste, these are mostly women, but when they see the menstrual pads in them, they deal with most of the waste, but they have real trouble dealing with the diapers or the menstrual pads. So I think I understand what they could be going through. All right, Victoria. So in the past few projects that you worked on, which system did you opt finally, and what were the key factors that led you to go that way?
Well, it's very individual, determining which collection system is most suited for a given authority. We've found in recent projects that we've done, the more urban and ethnically diverse authorities have tended to find that a single stream system works better, and that's partly due to the fact that the type of collection system you've got operating, you need it to be as quick and as efficient as possible from a collections perspective, because your the amount of time you take to collect is obviously impacting on traffic and all your road networks, and also it's communicating how to use the system. So if you have a very ethnically diverse population where a lot of your residents, their first language isn't English, then actually communicating the recycling messages become much easier if you have a single bin and a single system. And that's part of the factors, but also it's linked to things like the availability of a MRF to process that material, where that MRF is relative to that given local authority that's looking at the system. So if you've got a MRF on your doorstep, obviously your haulage costs are reduced. If, however, you haven't got that facility available in the locality, then it can sway the argument the other way, because you've got to look at the additional costs associated with transporting that material to a processing plant for it to then be separated. So there are a lot of different factors that come into play when you're looking at what system would be preferable, and it does come down to individual circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Professor Dubey, does this change for single households and for large institutions? I mean, can we go with source separated, at least for the large institutions, where it's easier to communicate the message?
I don't know. Like in large institutions, you have people from various backgrounds. So probably, yes, maybe in a big office setting, kind of, you can have different kind of bins over there, and people can throw in. But I have seen, like I did a study at East Tennessee State University, which is a university. So you have the students who are attending university, and we had a bin which had trash component on one side and recyclable just next to it. It was a single bin with 3 compartments. And it's still on the trash component, we found 21% recyclables. So it's sometimes even in a university setting, if it doesn't work, how you expect it to work in a workshop floor, where you have the workers from all the diverse background coming into work. So again, education, hammering it again and again and again. I saw that work pretty nicely in New Zealand. Even they start from very beginning in Auckland City especially. They even clean their soda bottles and milk jugs before they put it on the curbside. And so New Zealand plastics is a very premium plastic, sells at very high value, but unfortunately they don't have market for New Zealand within New Zealand, so they had to send it overseas. But the education from elementary school, it's hammering it down to the people. It worked very nicely. It works pretty nicely in Auckland City. That's based on my experience when I spent almost 18, 19 months over there a few years back. And in Guelph, we saw that it was very difficult we were getting more contamination in multifamily residential complexes than in single households. So, because, and especially when you have the dynamic population, especially if you have a university town, where every year you have a new batch of students coming in or new residents coming in, and they don't know how the things works in that particular city, what is recyclable, what is not recyclable, because of the way the system is set up. So, it's a moving challenge so you need to have a city officers just working on it every year and try to improve the system. So
that could be the reason why you found 21% in the trash bin, and I think they should be caught during orientation and then told about this. Brad, is it necessary to wash your recyclables?
They don't have to be, spotless. The machinery will handle it pretty well. However, especially in your plastics in your bottles, if there is excessive liquid in there, or like your mayonnaise jar, you have too much in there, the optical units won't see it. The material, the liquid actually absorbs the light and it doesn't reflect back, so the optical units won't see it, so it doesn't get recycled. So you need to get the liquid out of there. They don't need to be spotless, but it helps them to be pretty clean, so the optical units can see which type of plastic it actually is.
Interesting. And we have only 10 minutes to go, and let's talk about whether this debate is actually relevant, considering the crash in recycling businesses and markets. There has been news about this, and Professor Dubey, what do you think about this? I mean, how relevant is this discussion considering that?
I don't think, like, you look at, especially from a developing country's standpoint, we need more resources. So recycling, maybe the economics keeps fluctuating, depends on especially these days, China and other emerging economies are where most of manufacturing is happening. So if the economy is down over here, we hear even in US gets affected. Recycling industry, if the cardboard goes from $30 a ton to less than say $10 a ton, I'm not sure about those numbers, but Brad will know better. But it does affect the recycling economics. But if you look at the long term, most of the materials, I think it's easy to recycle and then to go to the virgin material and make a fresh product out of that. So recycling business will stay. I don't think it will collapse, especially with the demand coming from the emerging economies increasing and for these raw materials, which will as these economies grow. So there is an up and down, there is a swing, which happened in 2008, 2009 as well, where we had this global kind of meltdown. Again, things, in my view, I would not say that the business will collapse. It will still keep on. There will be a positive trend, only if you look at the overall trend over coming decade or so.
Mm-hmm. And Victoria, in the UK, there was a bottle manufacturer which was about to be closed or was closed. And do you think a difference in maybe the system used to collect the waste would have made any difference to that company?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about contamination within material streams and the impact that has on reprocessors. And within the UK, there's been a drive to improve the quality of recycling in order to try and correct, I suppose, a perceived market failing in the commodities market. And the way that the government has addressed this is to introduce some new regulation, which is basically it comes under the environmental permitting. So everyone who operates a waste facility needs an environmental permit. And as part of those new requirements, if you operate a MRF, then you have to report to the government on the standard of your incoming and outgoing material. So basically what that means is you have to sample your incoming product to report the level of contamination coming in, and then also you're then looking at the efficiency of your MRF and how much contamination is then left in your output product streams that you're sending to reprocessors. And I suppose the driver behind the new regulation is to try and get the MRF operators that were producing very poor product and sending it on to reprocessors and causing them difficulties, was basically to get those those MRFs to improve their systems, introduce new technology, or improve quality control to actually make sure that we can produce high quality recycling from any system that is operated, and that it is suitable for the markets to try and support reprocessors in delivering their recycling effort, because at the end of the day we have very high recycling targets to meet. We have statutory targets from the EU of 50% recycling by 2020. We're currently at 44, so we've still got some way to go. And actually in Scotland and Wales, they've got targets of 60% and 64% by 2020. So, we can't afford for the recycling system to collapse, because, we have these targets and, are doing a lot of infrastructure has been put in place to help us deliver these targets.
Okay, and let's take final questions for each one of you. And I'll ask Victoria again. Based on what you said now. So, are these MRFs, material recovery facilities, are they expected to do a very detailed characterization study for the input and output, and doesn't that increase costs? And also, do you think UK will be able to achieve their targets with the increasing regulation?
On the first questions of increasing costs, yes, it does increase costs at the MRF. There was an impact assessment undertaken before the regulation was brought in, and it was estimated that it was between £2 and £12 per tonne, depending on the size of the MRF, because it's all facilities processing over 1,000 tonnes of material, dry mix recycling. that have a permit can potentially come within scope of the regulations. So actually, if you're a very small operator, the amount of sampling you've got to do is quite high relative to the amount of material processing, and that can, on a per ton basis, it can be quite expensive. And in addition to that, you've also got to pay the regulator for the privilege of ensuring that you're compliant. So there's costs of that as well. So yes, it does increase costs, but the hope is that that data that they will collect through the reporting will lead them to improve their systems, either by communicating to those local authorities about, you're delivering us material with 15%, 20% contamination, you need to improve your processes to make our process cheaper, meaning that we can produce better products and achieve better income. So the hope is that the benefits of improved quality and improved income will outweigh the costs of having to implement the system. But we've only just had the first set of data, and there have been some issues with people understanding how to input the data. So I think it will take another year before we have any real concrete, useful information coming out of the system. And it'll be interesting to see, what impact that has going forward.
Mm-hmm. That'll definitely be interesting, and lots of questions there. So, any final concluding remarks, and what's your response to the targets?
To the targets, I think from an England perspective, within the industry, it's thought we're unlikely to meet the 50% target by 2020. One of the reasons being that the recycling rate isn't keeping up with the pace of waste growth for various reasons, probably due to the change in composition. Like we were saying before, you're collecting the same volumes of material or more volume of material, but because it's all the targets are weight driven, and they generally promote, because we seem to have two almost conflicting pieces of legislation. We've got, on the one hand, one driver to improve quality and reduce contamination, and then on the other hand, you've got a target to collect as much as you possibly can. So it's difficult to see how the MRF sampling information, it's difficult to see how that's going to help us achieve the recycling, because I think in the short term at least it will lead to a fall in the recycling rate. Just because of the way we're reporting, we've just improved our reporting system. So there's no actual change in the recycling rate, but there'll be more authorities reporting their true recycling performance, because the contamination will be much better understood.
Right.
And in terms of Scotland and Wales, Scotland are quite a long way from their target and have quite an ambitious target of 60%. So I think there's some concerns about whether that will be met. The Welsh government have more incremental targets between now and 2020. They've met they're exceeding their current target for the current year. However, there's still a long ways for them to go to get to the 2020 target. So,
okay.
Yeah, work to be done.
Yeah, thank you. And Brad, so can US achieve its targets without much regulation?
No. The short answer is no. and part of the reason, especially here in the U.S., is that, and I'm sure Victoria could understand from the U.K., is the cost for disposal here in many areas is so cheap. It's much cheaper than many other places anywhere, other than possibly New England. And so trying to convince counties and municipalities and even the citizens that the needs for recycling and the needs to actually pay for it versus the fact that it's much cheaper to just dump it in a hole over there, it is still a difficult conversion here in the U.S. People do want to recycle. People tend not to want to pay for it. So it's not free. In fact, that's been one of the biggest things kind of this year that a lot of industry people have been trying to get out there, that, look, recycling is a very important thing. There are industries here that need the recyclables. They would rather take the recyclables than the virgin material. The demand is there. The prices keep going up and down, but really they've kind of leveled out. I think they're a little bit more probably realistic right now, but there's still a demand for it. But to be able to go out and collect it and not have that much of a burden on the people to bring it all in to the actual sites themselves, there is still cost in that. There's still cost in the collection. There's still cost in the processing. There's still, you know, it's going to take some money and some effort from, you know, everybody to be able to do this right. And that's hard when you're like, well, it's still okay, you know, it costs me half or less to just go dump it in the hole. And that's still something that's really taking some time to convince everybody that it's you know, globally it's much better to pay that cost now than later when you have, you know, when you're dealing with all the waste that's occurring. So it's a process for sure. You know, if you talk to an individual, everyone says yes, I want to recycle. But if you know, talk to the entire city and say, will you pay for it? Yeah, not always.
Great, thank you, Brad. And Professor Dubey, so what are your concluding remarks? And maybe you can summarize the whole panel for our viewers. That would be wonderful.
So, like as Brad said, the similar thing kind of exists for many parts of Canada as well. So you have people want to recycle, but where the money is going to come from? And especially the areas where we have adjoining borders with U.S. Many of the waste does make into the U.S. Across the border and gets dumped over there because it's costlier to dispose it in Canada than to take it across the border and dump it in cheaper landfills in Michigan and other places. So that does happen. So in terms of overall, about the panel, whether the multi-stream recycling or a single-stream recycling, there is benefits of both. And it depends on where you are. As Brad mentioned, if you are in a semi-rural area, it's probably having a multi-stream recycling makes more sense. You have the drop-off centers, people bring the waste over there, they put it in multi-stream, and you can collect those individual stream and process it and package it and make it and put it on the international market. For big cities, highly dense population, and I think single stream probably will make more sense because that way you can collect more, and then you can have nowadays there are very sophisticated MRF with a lot of technologies to separate different fractions, and they are able to do that. Some of the material becomes challenging, especially some of these newer juice bottles, those where it has the wrapping all around it. I remember one recyclers in near Toronto, they were struggling how to take the wrapper off, and which is all wrapped around because of the marketing of the product. So again, some of the product design needs to get into there in terms of how to better recycle, but some of the marketing gurus they look at only how to make it more kind of, I would say, more appealing to the consumer rather than looking at the recycling potential of that product. So it's like a multi-stream, single stream, both have their own places. Some places one will work, some places the other will work. And in developing countries like in India, where I'm sitting right now, it's here things are with the new government. Things are, at least people have started talking about waste management. That's a good thing. And we have a new waste management rules. It's on web. People can make comments on that, and it's more streamlined than the previous rules, which you may be aware of. And hopefully things will start moving. In terms of recycling, here we have a lot of informal recycling, but those are not recycled in a, I would say, engineered way or more technical way. So there is a lot of environmental and human health impact associated with that, which should be looked into. But it's a livelihood for many people in the informal sector. So there is a lot of social issues associated with that as well here, especially in countries like India.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Professor. And we are almost 4 minutes over time. And I hope, with this, let's end the panel. And I hope all of you learned more about these two subjects. And let's meet again next week to discuss solid waste management during humanitarian response. And thank you very much, and see you all. Have a good day or good night. Bye.